Welcome to Swami Reacts. Today we are sharing some thoughts about Christspiracy. This is a movie I watched last year, actually, after a few weeks after it was announced. But recently I had the visit of a dear friend, Christian monk priest, Father Cashin, and I invited him to watch it again. He never watched it, so we went through that. So it's a very interesting movie documentary from the authors of another movie called Cowspiracy. It's all, as you can imagine, related to vegetarianism, veganism more particularly. So in this case, the whole topic is examined around the theme of ethics in connection to spirituality and religion, my more particular Christianity, but also touching up on other traditions like Buddhism, Judaism, kosher, Hinduism in general, as what they call Hinduism, of course. One image of Krishna appears as protector of cows. So the whole thing starts, and I share as much as I can not to spoil you from watching it. The whole documentary starts with one of the two main doers of the documentary meeting the other in a presentation. One was a filmmaker already, and the other one was starting his career in filmmaking with a background in Christianity, but starting to be troubled with some statements and with the reality of animal suffering in connection with apparently Christianity promoting eating meat, the Bible, Jesus' example, and so on. So at one point, one of these two main characters is meeting the other in a presentation that the first one was doing a certain film, and the other one is asking, like, what's the Christ-like way to kill an animal? And the other person doesn't know what to say, basically. He starts to thinking about Christ, what he said, how he lived his life, and then go into the very act of having to kill an animal in order to eat it. And he didn't know what to do. So eventually, this all unpacks in the two of them developing a relationship and entering into this project that converges in the form of Christspiracy, which basically the whole theme goes through this particular question: which is the Christ-like way or spiritual way, religious way of killing an animal? In other words, how can we justify meat eating in the context of under the light of the teachings of sacred scriptures, sacred tradition, whether that is Christianity, again, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, to use a broad term, of course, and different traditions inside of that, Buddhism. So the main doers of this documentary start to travel around the world. The whole documentary takes us to different places, from the Vatican to Oxford to Jerusalem to India and whatnot. So he starts to inquire, of course, first from pastors. One of the main characters asks his childhood pastors, the one who baptized him and so on, what's the Christ-like way to kill an animal? And of course, we start to realize, at least from how they reply, they have no clear answer about it. They are clear about, yes, there is no doubt Jesus ate meat. There's no doubt we are free to eat meat, and it's good and necessary, and those who are not doing that are wrong. There are some who think like that. But when it comes to, okay, what's the way to do that according to Christ? What's the mood to engage in that in a way that honors all the teachings of Christ about love, compassion, and so on? So he inquires from pastors, even from Buddhist monks, with, interestingly, many of them. The character of the movie, he's realizing it's not the character, a real person. He realizes, okay, I thought Buddhism was about not eating meat, it was ahimsa, was about Buddha, was about nonviolence. But eventually he realizes, oh, the Dalai Lama is not vegetarian. And then he starts to interview other Buddhist monks who say, we are all for ahimsa. We won't kill an animal, but if someone serves us meat, we will take it, because we have not been part of the killing of the animal. And refusing what is being served to us will be violence to the person offering the meat to us. That was the particular ethic or logic, so to say. So he goes through different people, again, who has their own ways of rationalizing and explaining this particular situation, to other Jewish rabbis who will kill the animals in a religious way, in a certain way, so to say, for the kosher products. He will interview, of course, Oxford scholars who will explain different sections of the Bible and reframe different words from the Bible, like, for example, the famous word dominion that sometimes is used to say, we have dominion over the earth, and sometimes that's taken as everything here is for our own service, in our own service, and for our own consumption, which, of course, the original word is something more close to stewardship. So we are given the responsibility to take care over all the species on this earth. Even I was sent some Hebrew, I don't have here the reference with me, but some Hebrew reference that actually the original word can be interpreted even in terms of like kneeling down, in a way like offering respect to everything and everyone, which is very much different from the notion of having dominion over the earth, but instead servitude, again, protection, taking care. And again, the whole documentary is about presenting different people with different opinions. Of course, it clearly goes in the direction of trying to show that meat eating shouldn't be justified in religious terms, and the ones who make the documentary are very clear about that. I personally appreciated the content. I may disagree with a few stances. For example, in one moment they will say things like, while interviewing other people, especially a Hindu teacher, they will ask him, and they will interview a shaman from South America. But this Hindu teacher will say, they will ask, is it possible to be spiritual and eat meat? And he said, not at all. No? So it was a black and white answer. Of course, it was one opinion in the documentary. It doesn't mean that the directors were subscribing to that. But I will say, in big part, I personally felt that's the tone of the documentary, which in that case I will disagree. I personally wouldn't say that if you eat meat, you have no spiritual insight whatsoever. You are absolutely blocked from contact with the divine, because, to be honest, that has not been my case, my experience. Of course, by saying that, I'm not here promoting let's eat meat and it's the same. I don't think that's the same either. But again, I wouldn't put it in black and white terms. And as I always like to say, a few times in the past, I remember having shared a few posts by different thinkers that are, it's known that they are not vegetarian, not vegan. Some of them even have an all meat diet. And at the same time, I feel they have very interesting insights at times. It doesn't mean that I agree with them in total. And I remember once sharing one of those, and someone commented like, no, that person only eats meat, therefore there's nothing good coming from such a brain, something like that. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I asked, so Bhagavad Gita, do you consider it a sacred text? Yes. Okay, one of the two main characters of the Gita is not vegetarian, Arjuna. Sorry if I'm shocking some of you by saying that. But it's describing the Mahabharata that Arjuna is a Kshatriya, as a warrior. He will not only eat meat, but he will hunt and eat meat, not cow meat, but some type of meat. Is described in the scripture, as well as some other personalities that we consider them saintly, even eternal associates of God, and so on. So my point with all this is the stage, the arena, the prospect is more nuanced than what we may sometimes will like to think. So I personally am more for the nuanced option. While I'm, of course, vegetarian, I personally choose to consume milk products when they come from an ahimsa background, which basically makes me a vegan almost every on a daily basis. But anyhow, it's an important point, I think, to bring into the conversation. The documentary not only talks about that, it talks about the leather industry, of course, connected to all that. And it gives a very interesting insight in connection to India for those of us who somehow are connected with Indian traditions, if we would like to call it that way. Because many times there is this idea, okay, we come from India, and India is the land of the sacred cow. So Indians protect cows. Is the place with more, some may think, is the place where you will find the most highest rate of vegetarianism, veganism, or whatever. And of course, that's not the case, to our surprise. And not only that's not the case, But even India nowadays, at least to the statistics given in this documentary, is the main country exporting beef in the whole world. So India is a land of contrasts. We already knew that. There's lots of purity. There's such a beautiful ancient civilization with so much wisdom and mysticism. And at the same time, there is so many other things going on. So one of those is this. India is the main exporter of cow meat. So in the documentary, they're showing certain, not only scenes of cow smuggling, that they're smuggling cows to be killed or for sacrifice. They're mentioning one big, I think the name was Gadimai, if I'm not mistaken, the largest animal sacrifice, I think, in the world, publicly, openly, justified as part of Indian culture, Indian tradition, without any, to my knowledge, any scriptural background, to my knowledge, they are given. So the documentary goes throughout different traditions. Again, it touches Islam, it touches Buddhism, it concentrates on Christianity and the Bible, but it goes in different directions and gives an interesting insights also from the perspective of the animals themselves as well. Like, for example, for the animals, I remember one liner that was very intense. There was, for the animals, all men are Nazis in terms of Holocaust. No, because Holocaust, in one sense, the very word Holocaust, interestingly, originally comes from something related to animal sacrifice. Holocaust means like completely burnt. And it's related to animals who were burnt in sacrifice and so on. So, of course, the very idea of a Holocaust is certain species are inferior and therefore they do not deserve to live, or they need to be exterminated. And again, how much this is applicable, of course, to the animal kingdom as well. Some people feel for animals, they do not deserve to live. It's the same. They're inferior. They can be killed. So in the eyes of animals, those type of people, humans who think like that, yeah, they are Nazis, another Holocaust. So there are some interesting consideration, which I will have liked that they will unpack them a little bit more in the relationship between speciesism, you pronounce that in English, speciesism, working together with racism and other oppressive systems, other isms, and how one is perpetrating the other. They make a brief mention of that. I will have liked a little bit more collaboration. And of course, again, it's mostly concentrated on certain sections of the Bible, like explaining this word dominion, like explaining this famous expression in the Bible, den of thieves, when Christ is like creating this, tumult outside of the temple by throwing away all the tables where money was there, and many times this idea and accusing them, this is all the den of thieves. But they explore the original Hebrew again, and the word is not so much, it can be interpreted as thieves, but also it can be interpreted as the violent ones. And it is described clearly how at that time in the Jewish temples of the time, there was lots of animal sacrifice, lots of blood coming in every direction. So the makers of this documentary make the point that because this was very prior to Jesus' crucifixion and mostly one of the main incidents that took him to be crucified, they make this point, which I personally feel is a little bit far-edged, a little bit too much, but they say, okay, he was actually protesting in that moment for the animal killing, and because he was protecting the animals, he was crucified. So he died for the animals, which I can accept that on some level, but I wouldn't reduce the whole crucifixion, all that the crucifixion represents for humanity at large and beyond that particular incident. I wouldn't reduce it to that particular incident, or that the fact that Christ died for the animals only. But nonetheless, it's a good point in terms at least of clarifying that the word thieves, and we generally ascribe that to money, was actually related also possibly to the killing of animals, and Jesus condemning in ahimsa spirit this idea of violence toward animals, basically. And of course, for us, at least personally in our tradition, I think it's very important to be careful, because we may say, okay, we are vegetarians or we are vegans, we are non-violent. But ahimsa is an all-pervading principle. I always like to humble my own self to, okay, that you are vegetarian or even vegan, it doesn't mean that you're ahimsa in every sense of the term. We can be violent in so many ways. We can be vegan or vegetarian and be so much violent with those who are not vegan or vegetarian, so judgmental, labeling, branding people, basically. So ahimsa is a very deep, of course, it's one of the yamas in the yoga system. Ahimsa comes first. Whatever you do, it has to be in a way that is not harmful for others. It's not harmful to yourself. It's not harmful for anyone. In every direction, ahimsa needs to be expressed. But it can take so many forms. Again, at the same time, to create a contrast, and we may require a different episode to speak about this. But some people may kill animals, let's call it in a sacred way, at least in a ritualistic, ceremonial way, like we know ancient traditions will do, with asking for permission, begging forgiveness, being willing to go through a similar experience themselves by doing that, with responsibility, with awareness, with sacredness of some level, of some sort, around the whole situation. They will eat all the parts of the body, not to do away with anything, trying to honor everything with deep gratitude. And of course, for most of us, this is not very familiar, because if we have gone through the experience of eating meat, that's just more directly slaughterhouse, supermarket to our plate, and that's it. So my point with this is, there are people who may engage in ways of killing animals and eating them, which of course we know there are not that many nowadays, but which is relatively deep and sacred and committed. And on the other side, we may be vegan or vegetarian and eat those products in a rather unconscious way, uncommitted way, or even violent way, because there is violence in eating plants as well, plant-based food. Let's be honest. And of course, as spiritual practitioners, we may be quick to invoke the concept of prasad, consecrated food. Now, whatever we eat, we offer that to God, to Krishna. Whomever animals or plants or species were involved in the offering are all redeemed or purified. And yes, I'm not here downplaying that important aspect of the sacredness of the ritual, but we should be very careful not to invoke this as a formulaic thing. Right? Just like I did my mantra and everything is solved, so I don't need to pay too much attention, to be actually compassionate, to be actually committed internally. I just need to know which mantras to recite, to follow the proper formula. Okay, the food now magically sacred, and I have no karmic repercussions at all. And I condemn everyone else, so to say. So it's not like that. No. So that's my point. We can be vegan and vegetarian, be still uncommitted, irresponsible, violent in how we deal with our food, what to speak outside of the plate, and how we deal with each other. So there's so much progress to be made in terms of ahimsa. And again, someone may also be non-vegetarian and be serious, be committed, be responsible in many ways. And you can have people who have spiritual advancement and they're not strictly vegetarian at the same time. So again, I'm saying all this not to promote one thing over the other. I continue committed with my diet and hopefully with the ideal of ahimsa. But I think it's healthy and important to open the conversation to more and more nuanced avenues of this. So at least on some level, I personally feel this documentary, Christpiracy, created a very interesting platform to continue sharing and to continue exchanging and to see the relationship between religion and sacred scriptures and diet and nonviolence and how it all plays out in the particular times we are living in here now, and what it means to be nonviolent and what it means to be committed to the cause of all species as beloved of God, how to play that out in practice. Again, it's an ongoing conversation. It's not a finished dialogue. So a few thoughts on Christspiracy, and of course, before concluding, I'm inviting each of you to share your thoughts. Please let me know if you have watched it, if you plan to watch it, or if you don't plan to watch it, what do you think about these ideas, about each one of these proposals and how to live a life of nonviolence, or what's nonviolence for you? Drop your thoughts on the comments, and see you soon for our next session of Swami Reacts.